Welcome to the Revision Wizards podcast. I'm Miss Catherine M.H., and with me is V.E. Griffith. This is episode 4, and today we're going to be sharing a scene analysis that we did.
Today's guest is actor, screenwriter, and director Dallas Gossett. Dallas joins us from Fort Worth, Texas, and we're going to discuss his short story, Grateful.
So we had a little trouble with my audio in this one, so please forgive us when you hear it. We managed to clean up most of it, but there's still a couple bits and pieces on the second half of the episode. Sorry.
It's okay. We still love you. This is a fun story we're looking forward to sharing with you, so let's go ahead and get straight into it. Here we go. This is V.E. Griffith with Miss Catherine M.H., and our guest today is Dallas Gossett. Dallas, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Alrighty. First of all, glad to be here. Glad to be a part of the Revision Wizards podcast. I'm excited. Dallas Gossett's my name. I've been acting about 15 to 17 years. About 10 of that was in a professional setting. I went to college and got my bachelor's in theatrical performance. I then dabbled in various artworks and different media of artistic expression, one of which is a single short story, which brought me here today. But I went through years of trying to figure out which ways to express myself artistically, and I basically try to do a little bit of everything. So that's about sums it up.
Well, that's really good. I forgot to ask, by the way, would you please tell us your pronouns?
I am he, him.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's jump into it. What would you want somebody listening to know about this short story before we get started?
Okay. I guess there's a couple of things without going too personal or in detail. I was a blocked artist for some years because there was a difference of being an artist in college and then all of a sudden having to pay for things like, food.
Doesn't that suck?
Yeah, and there's these things called roofs that have like apartments or houses under them, and you have to pay for them too. It just became the new focus once I hit the real world. So a couple of years of not being able to express myself and getting kind of stuck in a cubicle where I just staring at a screen and stressed out and bosses just not feeling me kind of thing. And so one day I kind of had a few minutes to myself and just opened up a Word document and started typing up a block of words. I mean, this is pretty much what it started off as. I later on went back to it after a little personal tragedy of a broken off engagement, where I then change the ending to make myself feel better, which I'm sure we're going to go into talking about. But the actual premise is from studying mythology and folklore in college. I was fascinated with different cultures and how they do mythology and folklore. Japanese poetry was something I found myself interested in. So I read these poems about, tradesmen, like a fisherman would be just randomly going down the river, and all of a sudden there's a beautiful woman wearing a scarf, and she takes the scarf off and takes a bath, and he randomly thinks it's a good idea to take the scarf and then go and say, hey, you're gonna be my wife, take her home, raise kids with her and everything. And then all of a sudden she oh, there's my scarf, puts it on, and then she goes back to heaven, and then she's gone. And it's that's one of umpteen different Japanese stories. And I just found it this fascinating concept. And so it really was the inspiration, the muse of what this story, Grateful, became.
Well, great. Okay. Usually what we do for these is we, both Catherine and I have completed a scene rubric and a Revision Wizard scene rubric that anybody can see at revisionwizards.com. Or at least you can see the blanks. I haven't asked, do you mind if we publish these?
I mean, sure, why not? It's kind of came into this with the kind of ulterior motive of improving myself as a person, because this is the first time for me to do anything like this, and to have a professional like editing process is something new and honestly terrifying. Just as a, yes, as a perfectly insecure creative, I was just like, I don't know if I want you to have my baby. And then now that you have it, might as well just go wild. So yeah, I have no qualms with publishing.
Okay,
What
great.
you said.
We'll put that on the website, and I'll include the link in the show notes.
Nice.
So usually what we do is we go through the Revision Wizards, the Revision Wizard scene rubric section by section, and discuss each section and where we found your work to be based on the outlines in the scene rubric. It gives us a way to be slightly more objective about your work and less wishy-washy about, well, I didn't really like it. It didn't work for me. That's not helpful and actionable. So we want to be helpful and actionable. So Catherine, you want to start us off with characters in the scene?
Yeah, sure. Let me pull up the stuff because I didn't know we needed it up. I'm great at this, guys. So I will say two things. So I like to come at writing and like editing stuff from 2 points of view: what the reader would see, and then what I as an editor would see. So just so you know, so this way, in case you're curious. Give me a minute. It's loading. I'm sorry. It's slow. I can start with Jason. I remember him. So let's see. So Jason is our main character. I personally like to have description of the characters, and I didn't get too much of him, so I kind of just made up whatever he looked like in my head. His voice was pretty interesting, I think, because as you'll see throughout the rest of my stuff, he starts off very numb. So the beginning of the story, I think, was very numb, and his voice, what he's doing, is very numb. And then as he grows, his voice becomes more determined, and it becomes more like, I'm actually a person, and I can be a person. So, and that fits into like the emotional and physical state for this character too. It goes from being nothing to waking up to being like, do I want to feel things? And then being like, I do want to feel stuff. And that's how I saw his character. Back at you, VE. What did you think of him?
To me, he sounded throughout the story. I agree with you about the numbness and the sort of just dragging himself through life, which, considering the very first section where his fiance passes away, is something that could be expected as an emotional reaction. I found him to sound very much like an educated American, which he is because he's an architect, and we would expect him to have gone to college and learned written communication as part of his skill set. But I felt like all of the characters pretty well sounded like educated Americans. It's a condition that our friend, the dialogue doctor, Jeff Elkins, calls monomouth, where the characters all sound the same. Now, I can understand that for Jason, obviously, and for one of the other characters that we'll get to, but I felt like that was an issue that, if we're speaking in English, Asian people will have a distinctive, or can have a distinctive accent to their English, and we don't see any evidence of that in the writing that I noticed.
That was a question I had too. Are they speaking English or?
They do. They do speak English, and reading earlier what you said, VE, about that, that was something that um, I 100% agree with. That it is a sense of basically this is my voice, basically for every character, and the information is just the words they're using instead of addressing the fact that this person would have some type of regional specific culture to their voice.
I did find that our romantic interest, Shizuka, her command of English makes a certain amount of sense to me because of who she is and her origin, and that could be, we could say, a magical power that she can make herself understood to anyone that she's talking to. But for the characters in Jason's office, even if they are speaking English, they will, and even if they're well educated and are fluent in English, if Japanese is their native language, they'll, that's something that you could put in your next editing pass and think about, just look at the manuscript only from the point of view of dialogue, and how do I need to change the dialogue to give each of these characters a unique voice.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Did you have anything else on voice, Catherine?
The love interest, her voice at the beginning sounds to me, I watch a lot of anime, very typical, like in that submissive Japanese way at the very start, where she's just small little bits asking little bits of information. And then it kind of just shifts into that everybody's voice as she talks more. And you don't really get to see that personality that she had was starting and then just kind of morphed into everybody's American. Not that she needs to be that submissive style, but that's where I was like getting the feeling from having watched so much.
Interesting.
Okay. Ms. Catherine, the next section is protagonist wants and needs. Or external pursuits rather. What did you think? What did the protagonist want, and did he get it?
So for his external pursuits, I have that he doesn't want, or he wants to save the shrine from being erased. So he knows what it's like to have something he's starting to care for erased. And his want is to, like, the external part is all about trying to make sure it gets saved. So kinda, because it does, kinda get destroyed, but then he does get to bring it back. So that part is where I'm like, he sort of gets to save it.
Yeah, he does. I rated the on our underdeveloped, fair, good, excellent scale. I rated the development of the protagonist's external pursuits as between good and excellent. I'm sorry, between fair and good. I'm looking at the screen and I can't read it. I felt like it was pretty easy to identify what he wanted. The problem that I had was that we went 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the story before we could identify it. So it's a slow burner. It's a good story, but it's a slow burner. So that was kind of what I thought about his wanting to save the shrine. It makes sense that he would want to, because he's falling in love with the spirit of the river, basically. But I felt like we didn't see what his need was from the scenes of his sort of pushing his way through life, in his morosity, in his depression. I couldn't see beyond his depression what his motivation was, other than simply existing and drinking a beer when he gets home.
And see, I went a little different on that. I have it rated as good. And for me, it was that shrine became his waking moment. So it's when he stepped out of his normal life had taken that step into the shrine, and that started the chain reaction of him being like, feelings exist, things are real. But then when it's burning, he's like, it's burning. And like, he doesn't call for help. And I was like, man, you just watched that burn and you walked home. So for me, that was when I was like, ooh, that doesn't match right. Like, there's a river right there. Start bucketing some water on it, like something. So for me, that was where I think that's why it was good. I was like, he was going, and then just kind of, I don't know what happened.
So the next section is protagonist's internal desires, and do they get it? My read on his internal desire was to find human connection and love after the death of his fiancée. In terms of how we'd rate this on the rubric, I rated it between underdeveloped and fair. I felt like the story didn't explore his need for human connection. It was simply assumed that he needed it. I felt like sort of beyond a single scene with the water spirit. His life changes after her touch, but beyond that, his internal motivations are never explored. Why is he in Japan in the first place? Because we found out early in the story or somewhere in the story, I don't remember if it was early or not, that she died in the United States. So if their plan was to go to Japan together, why did he go by himself? Why would he have gone by himself? That's a little backstory that we can add that'll add some color to the character and give us a hint about his motivations. Now, maybe he was just trying for, the geographic cure and running from his problems, and that's fine. But some discussion of that would, I think, be warranted. Catherine?
Yeah.
So my internal desire for this character was the need to wake up. It wasn't even about having a connection with a person. It was just connecting again. So even just like waking up was my idea of what his internal need was. So it wouldn't have mattered if it was a friend, if it was a spirit woman. I feel like he just needed that wake up to pull himself out of that. So that's why I rated this section as good. The only thing I had was that he's going through such a good amount of growth, and then the story kind of cuts in places where you're like, well, what happened during that section? And then you don't really see it. You just see, oh, look, he's grown. Did he, or how did he grow? So that's where my part was.
Actually, this is the part that, I myself, as getting a little too close to being Jason in the story in real life at that time, didn't have an aim. So, admittedly, it is a little bit of A and a little bit of B, where it is a sense of wanting a semblance of what they had before. What Jason wanted was that connection, that love. But at the same time, even though it's briefly touched on, you absolutely are right about it needs to be fleshed out, or had some meat put onto it. Was a coworker asking to go out for a drink, and he has almost like a quick nod and then a passerby of hey, you still go for that drink? When the coworker is surprised, that's kind of what it's touched on. So it's a sense of connecting. It really is. The Jason wants to connect with not only other people but to himself, and that's kind of like you said. It's a slow burner, and I rereading it because it's been a while. I wrote it some years ago. It really does have the sense of where I believe I was trying to show what monotony felt like. The problem with that is that it's hard to read in that sense. But the idea was that grief and despair can dragged life to where time stops. Time is an enemy. That time is just cruel. And so this desperate clawing to be present in a moment, being present, period, I believe is kind of how the desired effect.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense. The next section is the force of antagonism or the antagonist. In this story, I felt like Katsu, one of Jason's coworkers, is the antagonist because he wants to destroy the shrine, and we find through admission that he did destroy the shrine. The problem that I had, and I rated the antagonist external wants to be underdeveloped, was that there's no explanation for why. The most obvious explanation is that mowing the thing down will save money on building a mall, which is fine. But then when an opportunity arises to both protect the shrine, rebuild the shrine, and save money arises, he doesn't take it. He wants to destroy the shrine anyway. So I didn't understand what his motivation was for that, either as an internal need or as an external need. And so I honestly wound up rating both as underdeveloped because he comes across in that way, and because of that, as just sort of a mustache twirling villain, and we don't have any sense of why that is. So, you know. Okay, we're back. And Catherine, it's your turn on the antagonist's external and internal pursuits.
Yes. So, wait, the protagonist or antagonist?
Antagonist.
Okay, cool. So the antagonist, I want to say his name's Katsu. Katsu?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that would be the person I would consider the antagonist. And I put for the external wants, it was a fair, because like he was kind of villain-like, and that's all. We don't really have anything else on what he was like besides just he was a villain. Okay, he wants to do something, but we don't really know why he wants the position or why he's so angry at Jason about it. There is we don't know what their dynamic was like before he was no longer numb. So we don't know if he was just like okay, I'll do the work you say, and yes, I follow you, and then suddenly he's pushing back and he's like, excuse you? So I felt like his external wants were very, he's the villain, and we get it. And then his internal needs, I put as underdeveloped because I can't see them. Besides that, he wants power, and I think that was all we get from that, which is fine because I'm like, it's a short story. We don't really need the internal wants and needs of a person, but I think having more of the external of why is this power play happening kind of more important to the story.
You actually, because I today kind of read a little bit of both of your edited copies of the work, which once again exciting, and thank you for doing. Like, that's great. And I was telling this to V earlier that the fact that he's kind of left side of the brain, you're kind of right side of the brain, or whichever. Like, you both kind of come at this differently. You inspired an idea because truth be known, it's just I wanted a ladder climber to be in the way, an obstacle, and that the grief itself was the antagonist. Which, so, like, by your editing, by your ideas, I was because you brought the Catherine, you talked about the meeting and how, like, you can't zone out in a meeting. Like, that's totally disrespectful. And I never thought of it culturally. I just thought of, if I'm numb, I zone out. But I believe that there was an opportunity that going forward in the next pass will be that the meeting will reveal that there is an opening for a new partnership and team leads will be looked at. So Katsu being a team lead, this will be something that he gets glory. And this would be a way for him to climb the corporate ladder. And then now someone coming from outside, he's only been there a little over a year, and he's going to steal that spotlight. And so the internal wants then would be basically that he wants more money, more power, and then however that his motivations would be kind of unseen. But I do like now it makes so much more sense, because at the time, and VE said it, I just had him as a vaudevillain, just kind of like, yes, I want to foil the plans. So he admittedly underdeveloped.
There is something about that zoning meeting. I think I'm getting feedback, sorry. That was interesting to me, that if they're speaking Japanese and he's not as fluent, it could bridge that gap of him zoning because of the fact that he's like, I can't even keep up with how fast they're speaking. Because native speakers will talk fast. It's just natural because that's how they talk. Versus someone who is the second language are still trying to pick up on it. And he's only been in Japan for 2 years?
I believe it's like...
or 427 days is what I saw was the the amount of time he's gone through the metal detector.
Yes.
So you could have it where he's only picking up small bits of this because they are talking so fast. So he would just be like, okay, I am present. I am trying to understand you. We'll get there eventually.
Which then, because if he's numb before going down there, it didn't make sense for him to get the job. And that kind of dawned on me after we said that. I was like, oh yeah, like he wouldn't get a job at such a high-end place if he wasn't good at what he does. So that makes more sense that the meeting builds conflict.
And you don't really discuss his age, so he may have had previous experience in Japan. He may already be a fluent speaker, something like that. But we need some background explanation, because if he's only been in the country 4 months, he's going to get hammered, and he's not. There's going to be a certain amount of very famous Japanese cultural racism, that he'll need to overcome somehow. And it won't just be through his being polite and obsequious. It will be, there'll be something else there that will get him the necessary respect that he has, commensurate with his position.
Yeah, true.
And again, we also don't know what he looks like either. We don't know if he's maybe Japanese American, so it's easier for him to transition because he does have similar looks to people. There is the one comment that Katsu makes. I can't even pronounce what it was, but I'm assuming he was calling him an outsider.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But other than that, I don't know, besides he's an outsider or besides he's an American, what else they had referred to with that.
Yeah. It does refer to being Caucasian. That particular word, Gaijin, it is basically like you American outsider. And it has different connotations in different ways, but that's basically in this connotation it was you outsider from America. Real quick on characters, I realized today that my experiences as an actor and reading scripts is that scripts are left more or less, especially in theater, kind of as a skeletal structure that's supposed to be used in different varying ways. So they leave out a lot of details that you just can't leave out in novels or short stories. And it's something that I'm seeing a lot more, and especially today, kind of prepping for the podcast, just going, oh yeah, this is definitely written by someone who writes theater scripts. Like, oh yeah, they'll figure it out when they see it. But it's like, oh no, they're reading it. And so that was a interesting kind of looking at it from a reverse engineering way. Because it's like basically it's the equivalent of writing a book from a movie, and I'm realizing that that's not as easy as just reverse engineering.
And that makes a certain amount of sense, because if your experience is in acting and in reading and writing screenplays and theater stuff, a lot of that kind of character development is something the actor is going to bring, as opposed to what's written on the page. Whereas with a short story or a novel, the author has to bring that, because the reader is not going to fill it in, So that lack makes a certain amount of sense, given your experience and your writing experience, and hopefully, if you try this form more often, you can be more aware of that difference. So.
Yes, and I think I will. I think this particular story can grow, and I'd like to see it grow.
I would too. I actually, I had a hard time with the story in terms of my editing skills and my editing judgment, but I liked the story. I think that it's certainly worth pursuing, and maybe worth publishing. So I think it's really neat. So, okay.
As the reader side, it had stuff to it that was good. And then when you're looking at it as, all right, here's the craft writing side, you're like, oh, okay, now we can pick it apart. But as the reader, you're like, yeah, I get this. And you can see, as a reader, a few of those bullet points where those would be things in the screenwrite where it's like, this is here, this is here, this is here. You need to have those there so this way they can interact. And there were occasionally descriptions where you're like, here, here, here. And you're like, you could just say it was all in one spot.
Yeah. All right, Catherine, you go first. What about the conflict?
So, I'm trying to remember what I wrote since I no longer have it up in front of me. Let's see, the conflict. So, I had the conflict. How about you go first?
Okay. My take on the conflict was how to save the shrine. And the problem that I had with that was that he doesn't face any kind of event that throws him out of his depression for the first whole quarter of the story. And so there's no inciting incident that's going to grab the reader by the throat and drag them through the story. And there needs to be, and I don't know in context what that needs to be. That's in some ways up to the author to come up with. But his fiance's death is not represented as an inciting incident. It doesn't drive him to make a choice. Since he was the fiance and not the husband, we know that he was not the one who made the decision to turn off her life support, because that's not how it works in the United States. It would have been her parents or her next of kin, and he was not that person. But sort of no event pushes him out of his humdrum until it's way too late in the story for that to have happened. This needs to be an act one, an act one, scene one, or scene two kind of thing. It does not need to be, I triple spaced the manuscript so it came out at 54 pages, and I noted that the first event that sort of gives him a kick is on page 14. And so, that's a quarter of the way through the story. So it does spark some and that's when he realizes the shrine is going to get demolished. Now, it does spark some creativity, but it doesn't really represent some kind of a personal growth or struggle. So that was the problem that I had. I rated the conflict as fair, because it is there, but it's not fast enough, and it's not strong enough. For me, the fire was the big event that gives him the kick in the pants to get the story moving, but that's 3/4 of the way through the story. So I don't know necessarily that you need to move the fire to the beginning of the story, but there needs to be some moment when he sees that conflict and begins a struggle of some kind.
I pulled mine up, so I'm now ready.
There you go.
The conflict starts with the moment he realizes the shrine is the location of the mall. And I feel like, so I marked it as fair because it's just him being like, oh, it's here. And he's like, great, so I've got to take some pictures of this. Oh, she's talking again. And it feels like because he was zoned out in that meeting, that conflict fell short. If we had had pieces where he was catching some stuff, where he was like, okay, we're trying this thing, don't really know exactly where they're talking about, I'm just trying to follow, and then he's like, oh shit, it's here. Then I think that conflict would fall more, because that's the starting of his really like realizing his location and where he is. Also, a side note, if he was to look at that picture, is she in it? Because if she's a spirit, I want to know if she's in the picture.
Oh yeah, I left it because it is, like I said, more of a short film in my head, and how my writing comes across. It is a sense of that was something that I left ambiguous on purpose. Was like, do anyone see her? Does anyone actually see her except for him? And so, as an author, you have to know these things. And since I'm now knowing it, like this moment, improv, I would say no. I'm going to say that that they can't. You can't see it, and uh, yes, yes. I think looking at this now as an adult who has healed from the trauma they went through that like inspired the ending to like make myself feel better. I think that it would be of more interest to have her be pretty much invisible, be for the fact that she's not actually present and is something that is more on a spiritual level, or the fact that she has the ability to not be seen. But leave that kind of question in the mind of the reader, I think, on the next 1 to 1,700 passes of editing.
I understand. I understand. I have that problem with my own writing, so don't feel bad. You're not unique. So
Thank you. That makes me feel so much better. I'm not unique or special, so
no,
that helps.
You're not. Your writing is good, but you're not unique. Yeah. Catherine, what did you have?
I said, look, he did need those tissues. He's crying.
There you go.
No,
okay.
No.
What did you have for the choice?
So his choice is to confront Katsu and challenge his authority. For me, that was his choice. I put it as fair because almost all of it is done off screen. So you get that he's like, hey, I know you set this fire. And then you're like, okay, nothing. And then all of a sudden, like, his boss is like, hey, you're teaming up with him. And you're like, why? Like, where did that even come from? And he's like, I know you. I'm going to set fire to it again. And then nothing. And you're like, so, we know he recorded it, but what happened? So I feel like there's pieces that are missing that could really help the reader know the big, like, haha, he had that recorder. But it was kind of like, oh, he had a recorder? How did he know he was going to confront him? Was he so short? Like, how long has that recorder been playing in his pocket? Like, has it just been going all morning? So, things like that, I think, would help bring that up from the fair that I have it in.
I also ranked it as fair. The issue for me was that what choice there is in terms of approaching management with the idea of rebuilding the shrine. is not difficult. It is not gut wrenching. It does not. It is not the difference between two awful choices or two irreconcilable good choices. The best bad choice or the irreconcilable good. It's just it feels obvious to me because of course he would. He wants to save the shrine, but what is his personal risk in trying to do so? Is there some personal risk? If there is, it's not explored. Is there some risk to the company? If there is, it's not explored. What makes this choice difficult is what we need to know and what we need to see on the page. And he needs to struggle with it. So that's where I went with the conflicts or with the choice section.
And more than that numb feeling, because he goes back into being that numb and then is immediately like ricochets back to the other direction with almost nothing besides, hey, this guy with a scar on his face set a fire. So I feel like there was that a bit of, there's no reason for him to suddenly be like, haha, I should have done this all along. Been like, why don't we do it this way and see how this works? Because how did he get this job?
That was my question. All this, like, oh, he has to be good at this, right? Like, I forgot that that is described as like the top firm. It is like a high end thing. So, looking at it with the notes given to, like the edited copies of both of you, I believe that there was more power in the meeting than I gave it credit. That this meeting could set up power to be grabbed by Katsu and some type of risk, because if an underling is going to overrule or go around a clean lead, this is going to be risking reputation. This is going to be risking possibly his job, and then at the same time and probably the direction I'm looking at after this would be in the sense of the choice would be between the job and this Hail Mary of a relationship with some strange woman at a shrine. And so this would be the sense of the fire or being maybe even possibly like protesting, openly standing out there and being an activist against building the mall in general. Something to like, this would be a sense of, this would be the end of everything he's known, and this is the risk of being what you were for the reward of being something new. Connection. So I think that's the direction they'll be going, in the sense of building up the meeting and building up Katsu's power, his worth even in the company. Like as of now, I have him as a sniveling, weasel who just like the boss is like, shut up. And but reality is he got there for a reason, and kind of give that weight, I think, going forward. Obviously, haven't 100% thought it through in the last like 2 hours since I read your edits, but I think going forward with the idea of the choice being luxury or life, worth or net worth. So
that's a good one.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, and the thing to remember about Katsu is that he is the hero of his own story, and he's going to act in that way. So, and that rub between Katsu and Jason is what's going to drive your story. That's where the story is their antagonism between one another. For consequence, I rated the consequence to be fair, again, because the choice was easy. And it was simple, straightforward, easy, because there wasn't a gut-wrenching choice to make. And there was also no consideration, which I understand for a short story, but there was no consideration of coming battles, because this is not the end. Katsu is not going to take this lying down. That is not, even if he's just mustache twirling, that's not what he's going to do. So, and that's why I ranked it fair as opposed to, some other choice. So, Catherine?
My consequences also ranked as fair, and it is, in my opinion, is the shrine will be rebuilt. So he not only gets the position, but he sort of gets the girl. In a strange way. It's very predictable. It's exactly kind of what the reader would want to happen, though. So they're sitting there, and after having read through some of this, they're like, yeah, he better not burn this place down again. And then you're like, cool, he got it, and they're going to rebuild it. And look at that, she's smiling again. And I really did enjoy that twist where he tells her the same line that she did. So that part I really liked, and I was like, yeah. So for me, it was very, very predictable ending because so much was left off of the page that you're like, that's exactly the ending I expected to happen.
Yep. And admittedly, when kind of as I revealed and mentioned a couple times, the ending was kind of an odd therapy. And it was a sense of like, I want this ending. So when it was a block of just words in a nearly incoherent stream of thought, I was like, all right, I need to make sure that the ending says this and then have a catchy phrase or something. That's kind of how I think, was being, raised in the 90s. Everything has to have a catchphrase. So, and so that was kind of the build up, but then just, I guess, I've noticed is that it's kind of an impatience. Like let's get to the warm and fuzzy. And that was kind of the therapy. I was like, all right, I'm going to get to the warm and fuzzy quick in life. So I want to get quick in the story. But looking at it, these last couple of days or, last little couple few hours even, is the idea of readers kind of don't want to be told, or at least I, as a reader, don't want to be told like everything of the ending. And I want I want it to be a sense of hope, but not, all right, oh, hey, I get everything. Oh, here's my cake, and I get to eat some too. And it's like, it was a little bit predictable. Predictable is definitely a good way of putting it. And when I watch movies, I always call it a Hollywood ending, because it was just like the idea of like, we ride off in the sunset, and also we find a puppy, and there's $1 million in my hand for some reason, and I get the girl. It's just, and then Katsu is just like in a ball and chain, like old school, with like stripes on him, because he like chipping away at a rock in a jail. Like I realized that this feel good, something I was told a while back, or so, it kind of came up in conversation with short films and writing, kind of was true hope, real hope comes out of real suffering. And I think that needs to be more of what this story needs to kind of hold, is that there's no real suffering in this. Basically, the idea of he had a fight with his pseudo girlfriend, and that's not a lot of total despair. So that, I think, with this conversation in your kind of things that you've written, your notes, that was definitely, I think, the new direction this would go.
Well, good. Okay, now we've reached the mechanical portion of the rubric. So the first section of that is showing versus telling. I rated the showing versus telling aspect as fair, and now I understand that is coming from the screenplay angle here. As far as I could remember, and I made a couple of changes to give examples of this in the manuscript in my track changes. We don't see any of Jason's internal thought. He doesn't think to himself at all. He does not mutter. He doesn't talk under his breath. It's an opportunity to hear character voice, and we need that. And so there isn't any. There were several instances where we did exposition about the character's feeling when we could have done that as thought or as internal dialogue. And I feel like anytime we have the opportunity for a character to tell us how they feel or to wrestle with a problem, it should be done with internal dialogue as opposed to narration. So, Catherine, what'd you think?
So I rated it between fair and good. So as I put some of the bullet formations, if we were to clean that section up, would land it more in the good section. I didn't mind personally that there wasn't any internal dialogue. I mean, it's a short story. I don't read too many short stories, but from the ones I have read, there isn't too much eternal dialogue, and especially because we're seeing the blankness. Like, I could tell those moments of he's waking up and noticing stuff. And you do go through descriptions of him sort of waking up, which is enough for me to be like, that was pretty cool. Sometimes you repeat it, though. And that part I was like, we already went through all of the subway and his entire routine for the morning. We don't need it repeated again, unless something is drastically changing. And the only thing that was changing was the television stayed off. So I feel that section needs to be cleaned up a little bit, and I liked the amount of blankness where you could tell the world was around him and he wasn't paying attention to he starts paying attention. So maybe a bit more description later to expand on that would be nice.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my question. I was going to actually ask you to that. Like, is an idea of have that be a kind of mechanical way of nodding at the same kind of awake? Because like when you talked about him being awake, I think that is something that I want Jason to enjoy, because I think in the beginning he doesn't want to talk to himself, because I didn't like talking to myself in my the inspiration of that trauma. So I like the idea of it growing, the internal monologue growing, because then the idea of like, if you want to talk to yourself, then other people will talk to you, in the sense of growing. And it, and shame on me for getting his name. I think it's Haru, was the coworker. No, Haru was the leader. Well, he has a coworker, and I want to see Guys Night Out. Like, after us talking about connection and everything, like, I realized that there was an opportunity for these guys going and drinking, and this can be revealing, continuing either conflict, character development, or awakening, whatever it is. That this is like the beginning of a real connection of human beings, literally human beings, instead of whatever Shizuka is. So I think that is a fair assessment of how that works, because I think Jason was written as a role to be played on a stage or on a film. So I never dawned on me to give him a face, a hairline, hopefully one better than mine. But just the idea of it being a complete human being, not as something that would be different compared, like depending on the company or the film studio that would portray it. It would be, no, this is what they are, and then you experience that as a reader.
It reminds me a lot of that movie, now that I can't remember the name of it, that the town is black and white. And as things start shifting and changing, splashes of color start to come in, and people start noticing that color's there.
Is that Pleasantville? I don't know if that's Pleasantville, because I know Pleasantville's in black and white, but I know the movie you're referring to.
And then it's all color in the end because they've all like woken up. That reminds me of this, where he's just going through stuff and like things are starting to pop out to him. And then it finally gets into that picture of like, wow, there's a world outside my brain.
Yeah. Outside of a 6-pack of beer and frozen dinners.
Yes. And breakfast.
What about showing versus telling, Catherine? I'm sorry, we just did that, didn't we?
We did mechanics into showing versus telling, yeah.
Okay, passive. I'm sorry, I'm still looking at the previous page. Passive voice.
Yeah, so I also put this into the fair good because we do start off with that blank zone into we're now being more active. Granted, a lot of it's off of the page, but there is some movement, so I feel like it will get better. So right now it's between that fair. In the beginning, you're like, all right, cool. Nothing's happening to this poor dude. He's clearly not wanting anything to happen. And then as stuff starts to happen, it should become more active.
I found that the use of passive voice was fair in this one. That makes a certain amount of sense in the beginning when we're talking about him being dreary and depressed, and passive voice might actually be appropriate for that. But toward the end, we really need to work toward active voice. And one of the things that I found was that you can recast the sentence such that the noun appears before the verb, and when you do that, you get much more active sentences. You didn't have a lot of my favorite word was, which is great, but you still can work on the voice at appropriate times in the manuscript. That can help you with your manuscript pacing and with your emotional tone, which are necessary skills that actually we probably ought to add to the rubric at some point. But that's kind of where I fell, was that a lot of the passive voice can be fixed through fixing the showing versus telling too, because he's going to be actively thinking, he's going to be actively engaging with his feelings, with his thoughts, and that will fix a lot of the passive voice too.
And the passive part with this also felt like in the beginning things are happening to him. And then it should start to flip where he's doing stuff because things are happening, and then he's doing things to change things. So then that gets that active narrative through that numb phase that you want to eventually get out of. So everything's happening to him. He's not making any choices. That's kind of passive-y. He starts to make choices because he's realizing things, and then he's actively trying to change things. Is, I think, how that passive part with the numb section would work for you.
I think I definitely agree. We mentioned earlier about a new direction of worth versus net worth, in that he making a choice of being a part of an activist movement, something of towards, even if it is simply standing in front of the bulldozer, not obviously not quite literally, but in the sense of that taking a stand, which would be the very much active, him standing physically against whatever change would be, then ergo putting his career on the back burner, or possibly losing it, like sacrificing it for the shrine / girl.
Alrighty. The last section of the rubric is sentence structure. I rated this one between good and excellent, with Ty going to good. I am very critical of sentence structure, of correct grammar. Yes, Catherine is nodding her head. I felt like the story showed a very good command of standard written English, which is necessary for something to be legible to a reader. If the reader is having to get through comma splices and sentence problems and run-on sentences, that makes it that much harder for the reader to understand and stay in the story. So I really felt that this was actually pretty good. I made a fair number of changes, but not so many that I would think that it's really a problem.
So, disclosure, I'm dyslexic, so the spelling and the grammar doesn't quite pull to me. So I rated this as excellent because it was easy for me to read through. I didn't have to stop and be like, ooh, what's happening through here? Or be like, wait, what is that word? The only spelling I actually caught was the name of the company. And I don't know why that's the only one that like stuck out to me, but you only spell it with the dashes over the O's once. And then from there on, I was like, it's not in the rest of them. And I don't know why that stuck out so much to me.
Okay. It admittedly, today, I was like, what? The E and the I are in the same place each time. I totally missed the dash. I totally forgot about that accent to it. That's really funny because I'm like, I don't understand. It's Seiko, and I just kept on looking for the EI because like I'm like, oh, I may have switched them. No, that makes way more sense now. That makes way more sense.
And it was the only thing that I was like, dude, man, why am I noticing this?
That's funny.
So for me, I thought it was excellent. It was an easy read through for me. I didn't have to stop and pause much. There was one spot that I marked out for you that I was like, I had to read this.
Yes, VE's edit of that is way smoother, and I like it a lot better too. Because it was, admittedly, I wrote it full on as like the parentheses on a script. Like it was definitely like a kind of thing that I was trying to verbalize as like, well, how would I act this out instead of just saying what actually happens.
So for me, I thought it was very smooth coming from the it's hard to read sometimes zone. So thanks for that. It was good.
Oh, I know. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I thought the changes that are needed are simple and straightforward, and they're not a big deal. So
no, I read more. I had more
really
time to read through your edit, VE, and it really is like syntax. I noticed just like things could be a little crisper. I tend to think in prepositional phrases instead of adjectives. So it's something like that. I'm like, oh, no, that makes way more sense. Instead of saying in Japan, you can just say Japanese. And it's like, oh, that's super simple. And I noticed that's a kind of a trend. And I don't know why I have like such an archaic, like, like instead of saying, oh, bakerson, no, I'm a son of a baker. So just, yes, that makes way more sense. And I like it. I'm looking forward to going through.
Okay, well, that's great. All right. We're kind of running along, so we need to sort of get it going. Do you have any last minute thoughts, Catherine?
I was going to say, since you like the acting part and that's part of you, act out some of those motions and some of those things and then write out what you're doing. Even if it's bullet point, then you can make it smooth. So because you're writing it from here's the blank, the actor's going to do it, then go act it. And then you'll be able to write down that experience of this is what it would be.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Alrighty. And I thought overall, this is a good story. This is an excellent start. As we've discussed, it needs work, but that doesn't mean that it can't be worked. It is not a waste of time. It's not a waste of effort. And it's, this is something that I would like to read in the future. So there we go.
Thank you guys so much for your time and all the work you put into it. So I will absolutely edit this and share this with you when it's a little bit more mature.
Great. All right, Dallas, where can our listeners find you on the internet?
Okay, as I mentioned, I am an actor. I also made my directorial debut this year. I directed a short film. I am involved with heavily a company down in Austin named Standard Definition Films. They can be reached primarily through two means. Instagram, their name is Standard Definition Films. And then on YouTube, it is Standard Definition. But the link to the YouTube is best really found on the Instagram. So kudos to them also because their first feature this year is going to be recognized and selected for 2 different film festivals, the Stuff Texas and the Austin Action Fest. So I am in that film, Part-Time Killer. And so yeah, you'll be seeing me on the screen the next couple of years quite a bit if you know where to look.
And there we have it. We hope you learned a little bit of the 3 C's and enjoyed our conversation with Dallas. That's it for today's episode.
You can find us online at revisionwizards.com, and you can find me at vegriffith.com.
And you can find me at scribes-pen.com. And don't forget that if you want to be an original member of the Revision Wizards community, you can join us at patreon.com/revisionwizards. Stay magical.
Bye.